Every sunrise began the same way. The Alpha King pushed open the stable doors, expecting another wolf to have died during the cold night. He always found the same young woman curled against the weakest wolf, her thin cloak soaked with frost, her hands buried in its white fur as though she were sharing the last warmth left in her own body. She wasn't stealing. She wasn't hiding. She wasn't afraid. Yet every wolf that had been too weak to stand the night before somehow survived until morning. No one knew her name. No guard had ever seen her enter. And when the Alpha King finally ordered his soldiers to seize her, even his fiercest war wolves stood between them. Why would the king's own wolves protect a stranger? And what secret had she been carrying into those stables long before anyone noticed she existed? The first light of dawn had barely touched the snow-covered peaks when the heavy wooden doors of the royal wolf stables opened with a slow echo. Cold air drifted inside, carrying the scent of pine frost and smoke from the palace chimneys. Alpha King Kaelen Frost stepped across the threshold wearing a dark winter cloak over his battle armor. His boots struck the frozen stone floor with calm, measured steps, but his heart already carried the familiar weight of disappointment. Every morning had become another count of loss. The royal wolves had once been the pride of the kingdom. They had guarded the borders, stood beside generations of Alpha Kings, and inspired courage in every warrior who saw them. Now sickness had spread through the pack like an invisible shadow. Strong wolves who had survived brutal winters and bloody battles now struggled to breathe through a single cold night. Kaelen refused to let anyone else witness their suffering before he did. He believed a king should always face pain before asking others to carry it. As he walked deeper into the stable, silence surrounded him. The only sounds were weak breathing, soft whimpers, and the crackling of lantern flames hanging from old wooden beams. Straw covered the floor while rows of large resting spaces sheltered the sick wolves beneath thick blankets of fur. Then he stopped. There she was again. A young woman lay asleep against the side of the oldest white wolf. Her worn gray cloak was covered with frost. Her hands rested gently in the wolf's thick fur as if she had spent the entire night protecting him from the bitter cold. Her long dark hair spilled across the straw while her face looked peaceful despite the freezing air surrounding her. Kaelen frowned. This was the third morning. 3 mornings in a row he had found the same unknown servant sleeping among the dying wolves. No guard had reported seeing her enter. No servant admitted knowing why she came. No one could explain how she passed the palace gates before sunrise. One of the soldiers quietly stepped beside the king. "My king, should we remove her now?" Before Kaelen answered, something unexpected happened. Low growls filled the stable. Not from one wolf. From every wolf. Even those too weak to lift their heads slowly rose to their feet. Their silver eyes fixed themselves on the approaching guards. Thick white fur stood along their backs as they silently formed a circle around the sleeping girl. The soldiers froze. These wolves barely had enough strength to eat the night before. Now they stood together like silent guardians. Kaelen slowly raised one hand, ordering every guard to remain still. No one moved. The strange girl never opened her eyes. She simply continued sleeping while surrounded by the most feared wolves in the kingdom. For reasons no one understood, the royal pack had chosen to protect her. For several long moments no one inside the stable dared to breathe. The wolves remained perfectly still, with their bodies forming a living wall around the sleeping girl. Their quiet growls echoed through the wooden building like a warning that every soldier understood without a single command being spoken. Kaelen studied the young woman carefully. She looked nothing like a thief or an assassin. Her boots were old and worn thin by years of hard work. Small cuts covered her hands and fresh scratches marked her wrists, as though she spent more time carrying wood and cleaning stalls than living inside the warm halls of the palace. Her face showed signs of exhaustion, yet even in sleep she gently rested one hand against the neck of the old white wolf beside her. It was a simple touch filled with kindness. The oldest wolf slowly opened his pale silver eyes. Elder Eric's had refused food for 3 days. The royal healers had already whispered that he would never see another sunrise. Yet now he lifted his great head and leaned gently against the girl's shoulder. A quiet sigh escaped his mouth. Not a cry of pain. Sigh of peace. The stable master stared in disbelief. My king, he has not moved like this in weeks. Kaelen stepped forward one careful pace. None of the wolves attacked him. Instead they watched every movement as though waiting to see what choice their king would make. The girl slowly opened her eyes. Bright gray eyes met Kaelen without fear. She quickly realized where she was and gently pulled her hand away from Eric's before lowering her head with quiet respect. I am sorry, my king. Her voice was soft but steady. I did not mean to cause trouble. Kaelen looked around the stable. You entered the royal wolf den without permission. My guards never saw you. Every morning I find you here. Tell me why. She lowered her eyes again. They should not be alone when they are hurting. The answer surprised everyone. No excuses, no lies, no begging for mercy. Only simple compassion. One of the palace healers stepped forward with anger in his voice. She is only a servant. She has no right to touch the sacred wolves. She should be imprisoned before she spreads more sickness. Before anyone could move, a deep growl rolled through the stable. Eric stood completely upright. Then something impossible happened. The old white wolf took 3 steady steps across the stone floor. Every healer inside the stable had declared he would never stand again. Now he stood stronger than he had in many days. The stable master dropped to his knees in shock. Even the guards exchanged silent glances, unable to explain what they had just witnessed. Kaelen never looked away from Lyra. For the first time since the illness had begun, one dying wolf had chosen to stand instead of surrender. And somehow the answer seemed to be standing quietly in front of him, wearing nothing more than a worn gray cloak. As the morning sun reached through the stable windows, its golden light fell across Lyra's hands. For only a brief moment, faint silver markings shimmered beneath her skin before disappearing like moonlight fading at dawn. Kaelen saw them. No one else did. And in that single heartbeat, he realized the greatest mystery in his kingdom had only just begun. Morning after morning, the same question echoed through the royal palace. How had another dying wolf survived the night? Word spread quickly among the servants, the guards, and even the nobles. Wolves that had refused food for days were suddenly drinking water again. Those that could barely lift their heads now walked slowly through the stable yard beneath the pale winter sun. The royal healers searched for answers. They mixed stronger herbs. They burned rare mountain roots. They whispered ancient prayers over the wolves. Nothing explained the change. Nothing matched what they were seeing with their own eyes. Inside the palace infirmary, Lady Seraphine stood beside a long wooden table covered with jars of dried plants and glass bottles filled with dark medicines. She examined every record brought to her by the healers. Each report looked impossible. No new treatment had worked. No strange plant had been discovered. Yet the wolves continued to recover. Her calm expression never changed, but deep inside, uneasiness slowly replaced confidence. She had spent years earning the complete trust of the royal family. Now something beyond her knowledge threatened that trust. Meanwhile, Kaelen ordered Captain Rowan to quietly investigate the unknown servant named Lyra. He wanted no public accusations. No unnecessary fear. Only the truth. Rowan questioned servants, stable workers, kitchen maids, and gate guards. Almost everyone gave the same answer. Lyra rarely spoke. She worked longer than anyone else. She often skipped meals. When her work was finished, she disappeared before anyone noticed. No one had ever seen her with friends. No one knew where she slept. No one even remembered when she had first arrived at the palace. It was as though she had quietly appeared one winter and simply blended into the background. That evening, Kaelen stood alone on a balcony overlooking the royal courtyard. Snow drifted gently across the stone walls while torches flickered below. His thoughts refused to leave the image of the young woman sleeping beside Eric's. He had expected fear. Instead, he had found kindness. He had expected excuses. Instead, she had offered only concern for the wolves. The memory unsettled him far more than he wished to admit. As darkness covered the kingdom, Kaelen made a decision. He would not question Lyra again. He would watch her himself. Without announcing his plan, he wrapped himself in a dark travel cloak and quietly left the palace through a hidden passage used only by the royal family. The icy wind cut across the empty courtyard as he crossed toward the stables hidden beneath the shadow of the ancient walls. Every lantern had been extinguished. Every stable hand had gone to sleep. Only silence remained. Then through a narrow crack between the stable doors, he saw a faint golden light moving inside. Someone was already there. And Kaelen knew exactly who it had to be. Kaelen quietly pushed the stable door open just enough to look inside without making a sound. The warm glow came from a single oil lantern resting beside a pile of fresh straw. Its gentle light filled the stable with long shadows that danced across the wooden walls. Lyra knelt beside a young white wolf whose breathing was weak and uneven. The small animal trembled with every breath, but it did not cry. It simply rested its head in her lap as though it trusted her completely. Kaelen remained hidden. He wanted to see what she would do when she believed no one was watching. Lyra dipped a clean cloth into a bowl of warm water and carefully wiped the wolf's eyes and nose. She spoke so softly that her words were almost carried away by the quiet wind slipping through the cracks in the walls. "You are not alone. You only need one more night. I know you are tired, but please stay with me." Her voice was calm and filled with gentle hope. The frightened wolf slowly relaxed. Its rapid breathing became slower. Its shaking began to fade. One by one, the other sick wolves gathered around her without making a sound. Some rested their heads against her shoulders, while others simply lay close enough to feel her warmth. Then Lyra closed her eyes. She began to sing. The melody was unlike anything Kaelen had ever heard. It was soft and ancient, carrying no words that he recognized, yet every note seemed to fill the stable with quiet peace. Even the restless wolves stopped moving as if they had known the song all their lives. As the final note faded, something extraordinary happened. Tiny silver lines slowly appeared beneath the skin of Lyra's hands. They glowed like moonlight flowing through clear water. The light spread across her fingers before gently fading into the fur of the young wolf. The little wolf opened its eyes. It lifted its head. Then for the first time in many days it stood on unsteady legs. Lyra smiled with quiet relief, but the smile lasted only a moment. The color drained from her face. She swayed where she knelt and quickly reached for the wooden post beside her to keep herself from falling. Her breathing became slow and heavy. She looked far weaker than she had only moments before. Kaelen felt a knot tighten in his chest. The wolves were growing stronger. But Lyra was growing weaker. Only now did he understand that whatever gift she possessed demanded something from her in return. She was not simply comforting them. She was giving them part of her own strength. Before he could step forward, Elder Eryx slowly turned his great head toward the shadows where Kaelen stood hidden. The old white wolf looked directly into the king's eyes. There was no anger, no warning, only quiet understanding. It was as if Eryx had known all along that the king was watching. Kaelen remained perfectly still. He realized he had uncovered only a small piece of the truth. The real mystery was no longer how the wolves were surviving. The real mystery was how long Lyra could survive if she continued saving them every single night. The next morning the palace felt different. Hope had quietly returned to halls that had been filled with fear for many long months. Servants smiled as they carried food across the courtyard. Stable workers whispered with amazement after seeing more wolves standing than lying on the cold stone floor. Even the youngest guards spoke with cautious excitement because the royal pack no longer looked as though it was fading away. Only Kaelen remained restless. He had watched Lyra give away her own strength with his own eyes. The memory refused to leave him. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the silver light flowing from her hands into the dying wolf while the life slowly drained from her face. He needed answers. Without revealing what he had witnessed, Kaelen summoned Captain Rowan to the council chamber. The loyal commander entered and bowed. "My king." Kaelen stood beside the large map of the kingdom with his hands resting behind his back. "I want everything you can find about Lyra Ashwin." Rowan looked surprised. "The servant from the stables." Yes. There are almost no records of her. Then search beyond the palace. Rowan nodded. I will leave immediately. By midday, Rowan had questioned old servants, retired soldiers, village elders, and palace record keepers. The answers were strange. Some remembered a little girl arriving at the palace years ago after a terrible fire destroyed a distant healer village. Others insisted no such village had ever existed. Several old workers believed her parents had once served the crown. Others claimed they had died spreading a deadly sickness among wolves. Every story contradicted the last. It was as though someone had carefully broken the truth into pieces and scattered them across the kingdom. That evening, Lyra quietly finished cleaning the empty feeding troughs inside the stable. She moved more slowly than usual. Dark circles rested beneath her eyes, and every simple task seemed to steal another piece of her strength. She believed no one noticed. But Elder Erix noticed everything. The great white wolf slowly walked toward her. His powerful body still carried the marks of age, but each day his steps became stronger. He gently touched his nose against her shoulder before turning toward the stable door. Lyra smiled faintly. You want me to follow? Erix looked back once before stepping outside into the falling snow. For a moment Lyra hesitated. She had never known the old wolf to leave the palace grounds alone. Yet something inside her heart whispered that this was important. Without telling anyone, she wrapped her faded gray cloak around her shoulders and followed him into the quiet winter night. Far above them, hidden behind the stone wall of the palace, Kaelen watched the pair disappear into the forest. Without making a sound, he followed from a distance. He had a feeling the oldest wolf in the kingdom was leading Lyra toward a truth that someone had spent years trying to bury. Snow fell gently across the ancient forest as Lyra followed Elder Erix along a narrow trail hidden beneath tall pine trees. The old white wolf never looked back, yet he walked slowly enough for her to keep pace beside him. The deeper they traveled, the quieter the world became, until even the sounds of the palace disappeared behind them. Kaelen followed at a careful distance. His dark cloak blended with the shadows between the trees, and his footsteps left almost no sound on the fresh snow. Years of leading warriors across frozen mountains had taught him how to move without being seen. After nearly an hour, Erix stopped before a circle of broken standing stones, almost swallowed by vines and moss. Time had nearly erased the place from memory. Ancient symbols covered the weathered stone pillars, and faint silver light shimmered beneath the snow as though something hidden still lived below the earth. Lyra stepped closer. A strange feeling settled over her. She had never seen this place before. Yet somehow it felt familiar. Her heart beat faster as forgotten memories stirred deep inside her mind. She remembered a gentle voice singing beneath moonlight. Warm hands holding her close. The scent of pine and wild herbs carried on a cold evening breeze. The memories disappeared before she could grasp them. Erix walked toward the largest stone and gently placed one heavy paw against its base. Nothing happened. Lyra slowly reached out and rested her hand beside his. The moment her fingers touched the stone, a soft silver glow spread through every ancient carving. Light flowed across the circle like streams of moonlight, awakening after centuries of silence. Kaelen stopped in complete disbelief. No ordinary servant could awaken forgotten magic. A deep rumbling echoed beneath the frozen ground. The center stone slowly shifted aside, revealing a narrow staircase leading into darkness below. Lyra stared at the hidden passage without understanding how she had opened it. Erix calmly began walking down the ancient steps. Taking a slow breath, Lyra followed. Kaelen waited until they disappeared before moving closer. He carefully entered after them, keeping enough distance to remain unseen. The underground chamber was silent except for the sound of dripping water. Crystal stones glowing with pale blue light covered the walls and illuminated faded murals carved long ago. The images showed men and women standing beside enormous white wolves beneath a full moon. None of them carried weapons. Instead, they held their hands against the wolves with glowing silver marks shining across their skin. Lyra slowly walked along the wall, studying each carving. Then she suddenly stopped. Near the end of the chamber she found a stone carving unlike the others. It showed a young woman with long dark hair kneeling beside a wounded wolf. Around her neck hung a pendant shaped like a crescent moon. Without thinking, Lyra reached beneath her cloak. Hidden beneath her simple dress rested the very same pendant. Her hands began to tremble. She had worn it since childhood. She had never known where it came from. Behind her, Kaelen felt his pulse quicken. The pendant in Lyra's hand matched the ancient carving perfectly. This was no coincidence. Someone had tried to erase her family's history. But the stones had remembered. And buried somewhere beneath the kingdom, the truth was finally beginning to awaken. The hidden chamber remained silent long after the silver light faded from the ancient carvings. Lyra stood motionless with the crescent moon pendant resting in her trembling hand. Questions filled her mind faster than she could understand them. Who had carved her image into these walls long before she was born? Why did the pendant around her neck belong to a forgotten place beneath the kingdom? And why had no one ever told her the truth? Elder Eryx quietly walked to the center of the chamber where an old stone altar rested beneath layers of dust. Time had worn away most of the carvings, but one symbol remained clear. A white wolf standing beside a human with matching silver marks glowing across both of their hands. Lyra slowly stepped closer. As she reached toward the altar, another faint light appeared beneath her fingertips. The same silver glow that had healed the wolves gently spread across the ancient stone. Hidden lines began to appear. They formed the shape of a map. It showed the mountains surrounding the kingdom, the moon forest, and deep beneath the royal palace, a narrow tunnel leading toward a place marked with a symbol of a black crown. Lyra stared in confusion. She had never seen such a place. Behind a broken stone pillar, Kaelen watched every detail without making a sound. His eyes followed the glowing map carefully. The hidden passage ended beneath the oldest wing of the palace, where only members of the royal family were permitted to enter. Someone had hidden an important secret beneath the crown itself. Before he could think further, a sudden sound echoed through the chamber. A step. Several pairs. Fast and determined. Eryx immediately lifted his head. His ears turned toward the entrance. A deep warning growl rolled through the chamber. Lyra quickly looked back toward the staircase just as shadows appeared at the top. Men dressed in dark cloaks rushed downward carrying swords instead of torches. Their faces remained hidden behind black cloth, but each carried the same silver emblem stitched onto one shoulder. They were not ordinary thieves. They had come prepared. The first man pointed directly at Lyra. "There she is." Another voice answered. "The girl must not leave alive." Lyra stepped backward in shock. She had never seen these men before. Why would strangers want her dead? Before they reached the chamber floor, Kaelen stepped from the shadows. His sword flashed free in one smooth motion. The steel caught the pale blue light of the crystals as he placed himself between Lyra and the approaching assassins. For a brief moment everyone froze. The attackers had expected to find only a servant girl. Instead they found the Alpha King waiting for them with his blade already raised. The leader of the masked men hesitated for only a single heartbeat. Then he raised his sword. "Kill them all." The narrow chamber exploded into motion. Steel clashed against steel as the first assassin rushed toward Kaelen. The Alpha King met the attack without taking a single step backward. His sword swept through the air with calm precision, sending the attacker crashing across the stone floor before he could strike again. Two more rushed forward together. Kaelen turned between them with years of battle guiding every movement. One blade scraped harmlessly across his armor, while his own sword struck the second attacker hard enough to knock the weapon from his hands. The chamber echoed with the sound of metal and angry shouts. Lyra backed toward the ancient altar, her heart pounding against her chest. She had never stood in the middle of a battle before. Fear gripped her, yet she forced herself to remain calm. Elder Eryx moved beside her. The old white wolf bared his great teeth and released a thunderous growl that shook the chamber. Even the armed men hesitated as his silver eyes burned with fierce determination. One assassin ignored the warning. He slipped around the fight and charged directly toward Lyra. She had nowhere left to run. Before the blade could reach her, Eryx sprang forward with surprising speed. His massive body crashed into the attacker, sending both of them across the stone floor. The sword slid from the assassin's hand and disappeared into the darkness. Kaelen saw the attack and fought even harder. Within moments, only 2 masked men remained standing. Realizing they could not defeat the king, they turned and fled toward the staircase. One of them stumbled before reaching the exit. A small leather pouch slipped from beneath his cloak and landed beside the altar. Neither man stopped to retrieve it. They disappeared into the darkness above. Silence slowly returned to the hidden chamber. Kaelen lowered his sword but kept his eyes fixed on the staircase until he was certain the danger had passed. Captain Rowan and several royal guards rushed into the chamber moments later after hearing the sounds of battle echo through the forest. "My king, are you hurt?" "I am fine." Kaelen pointed toward the leather pouch lying on the stone floor. "Bring it here." Rowan carefully opened it. Inside rested several small glass bottles filled with thick black liquid. Beneath them lay folded papers marked with strange symbols and a sealed letter carrying the royal crest. Kaelen broke the seal. As he read the message, his expression slowly hardened. The letter contained detailed instructions for adding small amounts of poison to the wolves' food over many years. The poison was slow enough to appear like a mysterious illness instead of murder. Rowan looked at the bottles in disbelief. The wolves were never cursed. Kaelen slowly folded the letter. No, they were being poisoned. Lyra looked from the letter to the recovering wolves standing beside Eryx. The sickness that had stolen so many lives had never been natural. Someone inside the palace had planned every death. As Kaelen looked once more at the royal seal pressed into the wax, his thoughts turned toward a far more dangerous question. If the orders carried the royal crest, then who inside the palace had been powerful enough to hide the truth for so many years? The journey back to the palace was quieter than any of them expected. Snow continued to fall across the mountain road, covering the tracks left behind by the fleeing assassins. Captain Rowan ordered his soldiers to guard the leather pouch and the poisoned bottles as though they were the kingdom's greatest treasure. Every piece of evidence now carried the weight of the truth. The wolves had not been dying by fate. Someone had been killing them one slow day at a time. Kaelen rode at the front without speaking. His thoughts returned again and again to the royal seal stamped upon the letter. Only a handful of people inside the palace possessed the authority to use that mark. If one of them had betrayed the crown, then the enemy had been living beside him all along. Beside the king's horse, Lyra quietly walked with Elder Eryx. She refused every offer to ride. She believed the old wolf still needed her company more than she needed comfort. Although Eryx had regained much of his strength, he never wandered far from her side. His large white body remained close enough to brush against her shoulder every few steps, as though silently promising that she would never walk alone again. When they finally reached the palace gates, many servants stopped their work to watch. Rumors had already spread. Some whispered that the king had disappeared into the forbidden forest. Others claimed strange lights had been seen beneath the mountains. No one knew the truth. Lady Seraphine stood waiting near the entrance with several palace healers beside her. She bowed respectfully as Kaelen approached. "My king, we feared for your safety." Kaelen studied her face. She appeared calm, concerned, perfectly composed. Not even the smallest hint of fear crossed her expression. "You need not worry anymore." His voice remained steady. "We found something very important." For the briefest moment, Seraphine's eyes shifted toward the leather pouch carried by Captain Rowan. The movement lasted less than a heartbeat. Yet Kaelen noticed it. She recognized the pouch. Before she could ask another question, Kaelen ordered Rowan to lock every piece of evidence inside the royal vault where no one except the king himself could enter. Seraphine lowered her head, once more hiding whatever thoughts passed through her mind. Later that evening, Lyra returned to the royal stables as she always did. She cleaned fresh straw, prepared warm water, and gently checked each recovering wolf one by one. Several young wolves wagged their tails the moment they saw her, while others rested peacefully beside her feet. Watching them smile in their own quiet way filled her heart with relief. Then she heard a faint cry. The sound came from the far corner of the stable. Rushing toward it, she found a newborn litter of white wolf pups curled together beneath their exhausted mother. The smallest pup struggled to breathe. Its tiny body shook with weakness. Without hesitation, Lyra knelt beside the frightened family. She gently lifted the weakest pup into her hands. The little wolf was fighting for every breath. And deep inside her heart, Lyra already knew what she had to do. Lyra gently wrapped the tiny white pup inside her worn cloak. Its little body felt almost weightless, yet every weak breath carried the sound of a life slipping away. The mother wolf watched with tired eyes but made no attempt to stop her. Instead, she rested her head on the straw as though placing all her remaining hope in the quiet young woman. Lyra sat beside the frightened family. She closed her eyes and placed one trembling hand over the pup's small heart. The familiar warmth returned. Soft silver light slowly spread beneath her skin until glowing lines covered both of her hands. The stable became completely silent. Even the older wolves lifted their heads and watched without moving. Lyra whispered the ancient melody she barely remembered. The gentle song flowed through the stable like a peaceful breeze. As the final note faded, the silver light passed from her hands into the tiny wolf. The pup suddenly took a deep, steady breath. Its shaking stopped. Its tiny eyes slowly opened. A quiet cry escaped its mouth before it nuzzled against Lyra's hand. The other pups quickly crawled closer and gathered around their smallest brother. Their mother released a soft, thankful howl and gently touched Lyra's shoulder with her nose. Relief filled Lyra's heart. Then the warmth disappeared. A wave of weakness struck her so suddenly that she could no longer remain sitting. Her vision blurred and the stable spun around her. She tried to stand, but her legs gave way beneath her. Before she reached the cold stone floor, strong arms caught her. Kaelen had arrived only moments earlier after checking the evening guard. He looked down at Lyra with deep concern. "You can barely stand." She tried to smile. "They needed me. You needed help." His voice carried more worry than anger. Lyra lowered her eyes. "They always come first." Kaelen looked around the stable. Every wolf stood watching them in complete silence. None of them appeared frightened. Instead, they surrounded Lyra with quiet loyalty, as though protecting one of their own. For the first time, Kaelen truly understood what she meant to them. She was not simply a servant. She was the heart keeping the royal pack alive. Without another word, he carefully lifted her into his arms. Lyra was too exhausted to protest. Her head rested lightly against his shoulder as he carried her toward the palace. Several guards and servants stared in complete disbelief. Never before had they seen the Alpha King carry anyone through the royal halls. Whispers spread behind them, but Kaelen ignored every voice. Only Lyra mattered. As they entered the palace, Lady Seraphine stepped into their path. Her eyes quickly moved from Lyra's pale face to the healthy wolf pup, following close behind Kaelen. For the smallest moment, something cold appeared behind her calm expression. Not concern, not surprise, fear. She realized the girl was saving wolves that were never meant to survive. And if Lyra continued uncovering miracles, the truth behind the poison would soon become impossible to hide. The palace remained quiet long after midnight. Outside, heavy snow covered the courtyards and rooftops until the entire kingdom seemed wrapped beneath a blanket of white. Inside the royal guest chamber, a small fire burned softly while Lyra rested beneath warm blankets. The exhaustion from saving the newborn wolf had left her too weak to wake. Kaelen stood near the window with his hands folded behind his back. He had faced wars, famine, and betrayal without hesitation. Yet watching one quiet servant risk her life night after night had shaken him more deeply than any battlefield ever had. A gentle knock broke the silence. Captain Rowan entered carrying a small wooden chest covered in dust. "My king, I searched the oldest royal archives." Kaelen turned toward him. "And I found something hidden behind a false wall." Rowan carefully placed the chest on the table. The lock had already rusted away with age. Inside rested several ancient scrolls wrapped in faded blue cloth. Beneath them lay a weathered book whose leather cover had almost fallen apart. A silver wolf had been pressed into the front long ago, though time had nearly erased the design. Kaelen slowly opened the first page. Most of the writing had faded, but one title remained clear: The Guardian Bloodline. His eyes narrowed. He continued reading while Rowan waited in silence. The book spoke of a forgotten family chosen generations earlier to protect the sacred wolves. Their gift was unlike ordinary healing. They could share their own life with wounded wolves through a bond created beneath the full moon. Every healing came with a price. The stronger the gift became, the greater the sacrifice demanded from its bearer. Kaelen looked toward the sleeping Lyra. Everything finally began to make sense. Her weakness, the silver marks, the trust the wolves placed in her. She belonged to the ancient Guardian Bloodline. Before he could continue, another folded parchment slipped from between the pages and drifted onto the table. Rowan carefully unfolded it. It contained a painted family tree stretching back hundreds of years. Near the very bottom, one name had been crossed out with dark ink: Ashwin. Beside it, another sentence had been written by hand: The final guardian must never be allowed to awaken. Kaelen felt a chill colder than the winter outside. Someone had not only erased Lyra's family from history, someone had feared them. At that very moment, Elder Erix quietly appeared outside the chamber door. The old white wolf did not bark or growl. He simply stood waiting. Then he turned toward the hallway before looking back at Kaelen. It was the same silent invitation he had given Lyra days before. Kaelen understood immediately. Erix wanted him to follow. Believing the ancient wolf was leading him toward another hidden truth, Kaelen placed the old book inside his cloak and stepped into the silent corridor, leaving the sleeping Lyra behind. Somewhere inside the palace, another secret was waiting to be uncovered. Elder Erix walked through the silent palace with slow, steady steps. Moonlight poured through the tall windows and painted long silver shadows across the stone floor. Not a single guard questioned the ancient wolf. Everyone simply stepped aside with quiet respect as he passed. Kaelen followed without hesitation. The old book remained hidden beneath his cloak while the words written inside echoed through his thoughts. The final guardian must never be allowed to awaken. Who had written those words? And why had someone feared a family whose only gift was compassion? Erix finally stopped before the oldest wing of the palace. Few people entered this place anymore. Dust covered the walls. Ancient banners hung faded above empty corridors. The air carried the scent of old stone and forgotten history. The great white wolf walked toward a cracked statue of the kingdom's first Alpha King. He gently pressed his nose against its base. For several quiet moments nothing happened. Then a deep rumble shook the floor. The statue slowly turned, revealing a narrow passage hidden behind the wall. Kaelen stared in surprise. Even he had never known this secret existed beneath his own palace. Without fear, Erix stepped into the darkness. Kaelen followed, carrying a single lantern from the hallway. The hidden passage descended deep beneath the palace until it opened into a vast underground shrine. Crystal stones covered the ceiling like stars trapped beneath the earth. In the center stood a circular altar surrounded by 12 towering statues of white wolves. Every statue faced the altar as though guarding something sacred. As Kaelen approached, the stone floor beneath his feet began to glow with faint silver lines. Ancient symbols slowly awakened one after another, until the entire shrine shimmered beneath the soft light. At the far end of the chamber rested another stone tablet. Unlike the others, its writing remained perfectly clear. Kaelen brushed away the dust and began reading. The Guardian Bloodline was never created to rule kingdoms. They were created to protect the bond between humans and wolves. If that bond was ever broken, greed, fear, and betrayal would poison both the throne and the pack. Only a guardian willing to give without expecting reward could restore what had been lost. Kaelen slowly lowered the tablet. Every word reminded him of Lyra. She had never asked for power. She had never asked for recognition. She had only wanted the wolves to survive. As he looked around the shrine, his eyes settled upon a large mural carved into the wall behind the altar. It showed a young guardian standing beside an Alpha King beneath a full moon. Together they placed their hands upon the head of a great white wolf while the entire kingdom knelt around them. Above the carving, one final sentence had been etched into the stone. When the guardian returns, the throne shall stand only through compassion. Kaelen understood the message at once. Strength alone had never protected the kingdom. The future of the crown depended upon the very woman who still believed her own life was worth less than the wolves she saved. Before he could think further, hurried footsteps echoed through the hidden passage. Captain Rowan rushed into the shrine, breathing heavily. "My king!" Kaelen turned immediately. "What happened?" Rowan struggled to catch his breath. "The western gates have fallen. The palace guards are fighting each other. Prince Malrec has declared that you are no longer fit to rule. The coup has begun." The words struck the chamber like a blade. The coup had begun. For one long moment Kaelen stood completely still. The ancient shrine around him seemed to fall silent as the weight of Rowan's warning settled over every stone. The kingdom was no longer threatened by a hidden enemy. The enemy had stepped into the open. Kaelen closed the ancient book and handed it to Rowan. "Guard this with your life." Rowan accepted it without hesitation. "I swear it will never leave my hands." Kaelen turned toward Elder Eric's. The old white wolf stood beside the altar, watching him with calm silver eyes. There was no fear in the ancient guardian, only quiet determination. "It seems the truth has chosen its moment." Without wasting another second, Kaelen rushed through the hidden passage, followed by Rowan and Eric's. They climbed the narrow stone stairs until the secret doorway opened once more inside the forgotten palace corridor. The peaceful silence that had filled the halls only minutes earlier had vanished. Smoke drifted through the air. The distant sound of steel echoed from the western side of the palace. Guards were shouting orders while frightened servants hurried through the corridors carrying children and elderly workers toward safer rooms. The palace had become a battlefield. As Kaelen entered the main hall, several loyal soldiers immediately bowed before him. "My king, what is the situation?" One wounded captain stepped forward. "Prince Malrec has gathered many noble houses behind him. He claims the sickness of the royal wolves proves the crown has lost the blessing of the ancestors. He says the kingdom needs a stronger ruler." Kaelen remained calm. "And how many believe him?" "Too many." Another guard arrived, running from the courtyard. "My king, the eastern barracks have joined the rebellion. They are marching toward the throne hall." Kaelen nodded once. "Protect the civilians. The throne can wait." The guards exchanged surprised looks. Most rulers would have ordered every soldier to defend the palace first. Kaelen chose the people. Without another word, he walked toward the great courtyard where frightened servants gathered beneath the falling snow. Mothers held frightened children close while elderly workers struggled to move through the growing crowd. Kaelen raised his voice. "No one will be abandoned. My soldiers will protect every innocent life before protecting these walls." His words spread through the courtyard faster than fear itself. Many servants who had doubted the crown now looked at their king with new respect. High above them, banners snapped violently in the winter wind. From the western gate, hundreds of armed men entered the palace carrying the colors of Prince Malrec. At their front rode the prince himself, dressed in polished black armor with a proud smile upon his face. He stopped only a short distance from Kaelen. "So the fallen king finally appears." Kaelen did not answer the insult. Instead he looked beyond Malrec. Standing among the rebel commanders was Lady Seraphine. She wore the robes of the royal healer. Yet she stood beside the man trying to steal the throne. At that moment, every remaining doubt disappeared from Kaelen's mind. The conspiracy had never been about the wolves alone. It had always been about the crown. And now the kingdom would discover how far its enemies were willing to go to claim it. Snow fell harder across the palace courtyard until the ground disappeared beneath a blanket of white. The cold wind carried the sound of frightened voices and clashing steel through every corner of the royal grounds. Soldiers stood facing one another with raised swords while servants gathered behind the loyal guards praying that the battle would end before more blood was spilled. Prince Malrec slowly stepped down from his horse. A proud smile rested upon his face as he looked at Kaelen. "You have already lost. The wolves are dying. The nobles no longer trust you. The people need a stronger king." Kaelen remained calm. The wolves were poisoned. The truth will soon reach every village in this kingdom. For the first time Malrec hesitated. Only for a heartbeat. Then he laughed. Truth means nothing when fear rules the people. Lady Seraphine quietly moved beside him. Her voice remained soft and controlled. The kingdom has already chosen its future. Before Kaelen could answer, a long haunting howl echoed across the snowy valley. Every person in the courtyard looked toward the royal stables. One by one the great white wolves emerged from the open gates. Elder Erix led them at the front. Behind him came every wolf that had once been too weak to stand. Now they walked with strength and purpose. The sight stole the breath from soldiers on both sides. The wolves ignored every raised weapon. Instead they crossed the courtyard until they reached Kaelen. Then something extraordinary happened. Every wolf turned away from the king. Together they walked toward the palace entrance where Lyra had just appeared. She had barely recovered from her exhaustion, yet she had left her room after hearing the sounds of battle. Her simple gray cloak moved gently in the cold wind as she stepped into the snow. Without fear she looked at the approaching pack. Elder Erix stopped before her. Then the ancient wolf slowly lowered his great head. One by one every royal wolf followed his example. Hundreds of powerful white wolves bowed before the quiet servant girl. Silence covered the courtyard. Even the rebels lowered their weapons in disbelief. No one had ever witnessed such a thing. The sacred royal pack had chosen someone. Not a noble. Not a warrior. Not even their king. They had chosen Lyra. Tears filled her eyes as she looked around at the wolves surrounding her with complete trust. "I am not worthy of this." She whispered the words almost to herself. Erix gently touched his nose against her hand. It was his answer. Kaelen watched the moment with quiet understanding. The ancient prophecy had begun to unfold exactly as the hidden shrine had foretold. But before anyone could speak, another sharp cry echoed from the palace roof. A burning arrow streaked across the dark sky. It landed upon the stable roof. Within seconds bright flames raced across the dry wooden beams. More burning arrows followed. The royal stables burst into fire. Panicked cries filled the air as frightened wolf pups remained trapped inside. Without thinking, Lyra ran straight toward the burning building. Kaelen reached out to stop her. But she was already disappearing into the growing wall of flames. The woman who had spent every night saving the wolves was now risking her life one final time. And this time no one knew if she would ever come back out. The flames climbed across the roof of the royal stables with terrifying speed. Dry wooden beams cracked beneath the growing fire while thick black smoke poured into the frozen sky. Frightened cries of trapped wolf pups echoed from inside, making every person in the courtyard freeze in horror. Lyra did not hesitate. The moment she reached the burning doorway, she pulled her cloak over her mouth and rushed through the smoke. Behind her, Kaelen shouted her name. "Lyra!" She never looked back. Inside the stable, the heat was almost unbearable. Burning pieces of wood crashed onto the stone floor while frightened horses pulled against their ropes. The air was so thick with smoke that it became difficult to see more than a few steps ahead. The frightened mother wolves refused to abandon their pups. They stood over the tiny white bundles, protecting them from the falling fire even as flames surrounded them. Lyra hurried toward the nearest litter. "It is all right. I am here." Her calm voice reached the terrified animals. One by one the wolves stepped aside, trusting her completely. She wrapped 2 frightened pups inside her cloak and carried them toward the entrance where waiting soldiers quickly rushed them to safety. Without stopping, she turned around and ran back inside. Kaelen reached the doorway just as another burning beam crashed across the entrance. Captain Rowan grabbed his arm. "My king, it is too dangerous." Kaelen pushed the heavy timber aside with all his strength. She is still in there. Several guards joined him, forcing the burning beam away long enough for fresh air to enter the stable. Inside, Lyra found another frightened litter trapped beneath a collapsed wooden stall. She dropped to her knees, ignoring the burning splinters falling around her. With trembling hands, she lifted the broken boards one piece at a time until the tiny wolves crawled free. A sharp cry escaped her lips. One burning branch had struck her shoulder, leaving a painful wound beneath her cloak. She ignored the pain. The last frightened pup remained trapped beneath a heavy support beam. Lyra placed both hands beneath the burning timber and pushed with everything she had. For a long moment it refused to move. Then a familiar deep growl echoed beside her. Elder Eric's appeared through the smoke. The great white wolf pressed his powerful body against the beam. Together they forced it upward just enough for the tiny pup to crawl into Lyra's waiting arms. Relief filled her heart. But before they could escape, the roof above them groaned loudly. Large burning timbers began falling across the stable. Eric's looked toward the far wall where ancient stone blocks had cracked apart, revealing a hidden tunnel beneath the building. The old wolf turned toward Lyra. Then, without making a sound, he disappeared into the darkness. Holding the rescued pup close, Lyra followed him. Neither of them knew that the forgotten passage beneath the burning stable would lead them to the greatest secret hidden beneath the kingdom. The hidden tunnel was cold and silent. The roar of the fire above slowly faded until only the sound of dripping water echoed through the darkness. Lyra held the rescued wolf pup close against her chest while Elder Eric's walked ahead with steady, confident steps. Pale blue crystals buried in the stone walls gave off a soft glow, allowing them to see the narrow path before them. Lyra had never known this passage existed beneath the royal stables. Felt ancient, older than the palace itself. The air carried the scent of stone, wild herbs, and something else she could not explain. Something familiar. As they walked deeper, the tunnel widened into a vast underground chamber, unlike anything Lyra had ever imagined. A great circle of white stone surrounded a quiet underground lake, whose surface reflected the glowing crystals above like a sky filled with stars. In the center of the lake rested a single stone island. Upon that island lay an enormous white wolf. Its fur still shone with silver light despite the dark stain spreading across its chest. Black veins stretched beneath its skin like poison flowing through its body. Even while sleeping, the ancient creature radiated a power that filled the entire chamber. Lyra understood immediately. This was no ordinary wolf. This was the Alpha Spirit. The first guardian of the kingdom. The source of the sacred bond between humans and wolves. Elder Eric slowly lowered his head. Every other wolf who had quietly followed them through the hidden tunnel did the same. The ancient pack had returned to its beginning. Lyra stepped onto the narrow stone bridge leading toward the sleeping Alpha Spirit. With every step, the silver marks beneath her skin grew brighter. The old pendant around her neck began glowing with the same gentle light. As she reached the island, the Alpha Spirit slowly opened its eyes. They were filled with endless sadness rather than anger. A deep voice echoed inside her heart, though its mouth never moved. "You have come at last." Tears filled Lyra's eyes. "I do not know how to save you," the gentle voice answered. "You already do. The poison within me is the poison within the kingdom. Only a guardian who chooses sacrifice without hatred can remove it. The choice must be yours. No one can command it." Lyra looked at the black poison spreading beneath the spirit's shining fur. She knew what the ancient words meant. Healing the Alpha Spirit would demand more than strength. It would require every part of the gift she had carried since childhood. Perhaps even her life. Far above the hidden chamber, Kaelen finally forced his way through the burning stable. He found only scorched stone and the newly opened tunnel leading beneath the palace. Without waiting for anyone, he rushed into the darkness, calling Lyra's name again and again. His voice echoed through the ancient passage, but no answer returned. Deep within the sacred chamber, Lyra gently placed both hands upon the Alpha Spirit. The silver light around her blazed brighter than ever before. Every white wolf lifted its head toward the glowing ceiling. Then together they released one powerful howl that echoed through the mountains, carrying a promise that the fate of the kingdom would be decided before the next sunrise. Silver light burst across the sacred chamber like the first rays of dawn breaking through the darkest winter night. It flowed from Lyra's hands into the great Alpha Spirit, whose enormous body remained still upon the ancient stone island. The glowing marks along Lyra's arms spread higher with every passing moment, while the poison beneath the spirit's white fur slowly began to retreat. The healing had begun. But so had the sacrifice. Lyra felt her strength leaving her faster than ever before. Her breathing became slow. Her heartbeat grew faint. Yet she refused to pull her hands away. If my life is the price, then let it be enough. The Alpha Spirit opened its brilliant silver eyes. Its calm gaze rested upon her with endless gratitude. You were never chosen because you were the strongest. You were chosen because you never asked for anything in return. The black poison rose from the spirit like dark smoke twisting through the air before gathering into a single cloud above the lake. The chamber trembled as the ancient corruption fought against the healing light. Every white wolf released another powerful howl. Their voices filled the underground world with unwavering strength. At that very moment, Kaelen rushed into the chamber. He stopped in shock. The entire shrine glowed beneath waves of silver light, while Lyra knelt before the Alpha Spirit surrounded by every royal wolf. Lyra! He ran toward her, but Elder Eric stepped gently into his path. The old wolf did not growl. He simply shook his head. Kaelen understood. If the healing was interrupted, everything would be lost. Pain filled his face as he remained where he stood, unable to help the woman he had come to protect. The poison above the lake suddenly took shape. It became a towering shadow with glowing black eyes burning like dying coals. The darkness released a terrible roar that echoed through the chamber before rushing toward Lyra. Without hesitation, Kaelen drew his sword and stepped between the shadow and the Guardian. You will not touch her. The creature struck with impossible force. Kaelen held his ground, though the impact forced him to one knee. The ancient blade in his hands shone with silver light as though the sacred chamber itself had accepted his resolve. Behind him, Lyra continued the healing. The poison beneath the Alpha Spirit faded little by little. His breathing became stronger. Its great chest rose with calm, steady breaths for the first time in countless years. Far above the shrine, chaos spread across the palace. Prince Malrec stood inside the throne hall, believing victory was finally within his reach. Then a deafening chorus of wolf howls rolled across the kingdom. Every soldier stopped fighting. Every servant looked toward the mountains. The sound carried hope instead of fear. Captain Rowan entered the throne hall surrounded by loyal guards. He held the leather pouch high for everyone to see. The poison has been found. The letters have been recovered. The names of every conspirator are written inside. The nobles stared in stunned silence. Lady Seraphine slowly stepped backward. For the first time, her calm mask began to break. She realized the truth she had buried for years had finally returned. And there was no longer any place left to hide. Lady Seraphine looked toward Prince Malrec, hoping he would save the plan they had built through years of lies. Instead, she saw fear growing across his face. The confidence that had carried him into the palace was gone. Captain Rowan stepped forward and placed the leather pouch before the gathered nobles. One by one, he revealed the poisoned bottles, the secret letters, and the royal orders that had condemned the sacred wolves to years of suffering. Silence filled the throne hall. The evidence could not be denied. An elderly noble slowly lowered his head. So the wolves were never cursed. Rowan answered with quiet certainty. No. They were betrayed. The truth spread through the palace faster than any rumor. Rebel soldiers lowered their weapons. Many looked toward Malrec with anger instead of loyalty. Others stepped away from Seraphine as though they no longer wished to stand beside her. Realizing everything had been lost, Malrec reached for his sword. Before he could draw it, loyal guards surrounded him from every side. His fight was over. Seraphine closed her eyes. For the first time in many years, she had no lies left to hide behind. Deep beneath the palace, the final traces of black poison disappeared from the Alpha spirit. The enormous white wolf slowly rose to its feet. Its brilliant silver fur shone brighter than fresh snow beneath the full moon. The chamber filled with peaceful light. Every wolf lowered its head in respect. The Alpha spirit gently touched Lyra's forehead with its nose. The silver marks covering her arms slowly faded until only one small mark remained above her heart. You have restored the bond that others tried to destroy. You have reminded this kingdom that compassion is greater than fear. The spirit looked toward Kaelen. Rule with the same heart she has shown. Only then will the kingdom remain worthy of the wolves who protect it. The ancient wolf released one final majestic howl. Its body dissolved into countless silver lights that rose toward the ceiling before disappearing into the stone above. The sacred chamber became quiet once again. Lyra swayed with exhaustion. Before she could fall, Kaelen reached her and gently caught her in his arms. She opened her eyes and smiled weakly. The wolves. They are safe. Kaelen nodded as tears quietly filled his eyes. Because of you. Weeks later, spring finally reached the kingdom. Snow melted from the mountains and green fields surrounded the royal palace once more. The stables that had once echoed with sickness now overflowed with healthy white wolves and playful young pups. Children laughed as they watched the great animals run freely across the open fields without fear. Inside the palace courtyard, every noble, every servant, and every soldier gathered together. Kaelen stepped forward before the entire kingdom. He did not wear his battle cloak. He wore only the simple robes of the crown. He looked at Lyra standing beside Elder Eric's. You entered this palace as someone the world refused to see. You gave everything expecting nothing. You saved the wolves. You saved your king. And you saved this kingdom. He slowly knelt before her. Gasps spread through the crowd. An Alpha King had never bowed before a servant. Kaelen gently took her hand. Stand beside me. Not beneath me. As my equal. As the guardian of our wolves. And as the future Luna of this kingdom. Tears filled Lyra's eyes as she accepted his hand. At that moment, hundreds of white wolves lifted their heads toward the bright morning sky. Their joyful howls rolled across the mountains, carrying a new promise to every village beyond the kingdom. The age of fear had ended. The age of compassion had begun. Far away upon a quiet mountain ridge, a young white wolf with shining silver eyes paused for one last look at the peaceful kingdom below before disappearing into the endless forest. Its silent journey reminded the world that while this story had reached its end, the ancient spirit of the wolves would live on forever.